Stand! Stand! Stand!
You want to dance? Ask me nicely. Let's talk. Better listen very carefully.
No problem.
You having fun?
No!
Thanks.
And
Okay.
you know, I want to tell you something before we start the episode proper.
Yeah.
About 2 weeks ago, I drove down to my sister's house for Christmas. She lives in North Carolina. It's about a 6-hour drive for me both ways. And I had fallen a bit behind on listening to the show, the JPVD. So I loaded up my iPod with podcasts and all the ones I hadn't listened to in a while, and listened to that on the way down. And I know it's because I was listening to the show that night. I had a dream that featured Van Damme.
Nice.
Yeah, no, I dreamt I was in the hotel I was in, the lobby, and in the dream, the hotel lobby had this tiki bar set up, which it did not have in reality. And in the dream, at the bar was Van Damme, and he was surrounded by his entourage, though, so I couldn't get a close look at him or anything. So he had a cameo appearance in this dream I was having.
Well, I mean, you can't afford to get Van Damme in your dream proper.
Right, yeah, so it was just behind the head
Don't have
shot.
enough sleep bucks. He basically did a Last Action Hero in your dream.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
Awesome.
we are talking Kickboxer.
Yeah. Let me introduce the episode.
Sure.
I'm totally going to keep that dream story in, though.
Okay.
Because that's too good to not keep in. So yeah, welcome to Jean-Claude Van Damme, episode 12. This is the podcast where we watch and talk about Van Damme films because he is the White Warrior. I'm your host, Marcus Jones, and joining me today is Zach Clopton from Zach's Film Thoughts and the Bangers and Mash podcast. How are you, Zach?
I'm doing quite well.
You are my first repeat guest.
I am. I was on the very first episode of the show, and now I'm on the first episode of 2017.
Yeah, I know. It is crazy, and we've learned so much in the 11 episodes since your first appearance.
Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, today we were talking 1989's Kickboxer. This is kind of one of the most well-known Van Damme films alongside Bloodsport, and I was very surprised because when I talked to all the people that showed interest in doing the show, that nobody jumped on Kickboxer immediately.
Yeah, because it is one of his most iconic films.
Absolutely. With Bloodsport, it kind of has everything in it that would come to be known as Van Damme tropes.
Yeah, I mean, he's fighting for revenge, there's lots of casual shirtlessness, close-up screaming, roundhouse kicks, splits, kicking people through stuff, crying,
Drinking and dancing.
Yeah. All the bases are covered.
Yeah, this movie has so many iconic scenes in it to where when you think of Van Damme, stuff that's even been parodied in other films, they do the Muay Thai fighting with the broken glass on the gloves. They parody that in Hot Shots Part 2, which I thought was a great parody joke because when he has his Rambo scene, he's fighting somebody and he basically dips his gloves in caramel and then in ice cream toppings, and I thought that was a great joke.
You know, it's been so long since I've seen Hot Shots Part 2, I'll have to rewatch it now just for that.
It is totally worth it. So this definitely had an impact on the cultural lexicon, at least in Hot Shots sequels.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating to me about Kickboxer is this was made, a year or two after Bloodsport?
Yeah, maybe just because I think Bloodsport came out in 88, and this filmed in 88 and was released a year later in 89.
So I've always wondered, because this film is very similar to Bloodsport in a lot of ways. I mean, the two share a lot of the same common threads. Both are about Van Damme being a kickboxer in an exotic Asian locale. In both films, somebody close to him is injured by a huge Asian guy, forcing Van Damme to fight for revenge. And they both even have Stan Bush theme songs.
Which, again, is another reason why this is one of the most iconic ones. I wish this was a trope of more of his films, but this and Bloodsport with those Stan Bush songs are amazing. But I think the reason for that is, one, this is the second of the 3 pictures he did with Canon, so they're probably just hey, this worked, let's do that again, because that's kind of how Canon functioned.
Well, yeah, of
But
course.
also, the writer and director of this movie was also the producer, or a producer on Bloodsport, so I think he's okay, I'm going to take a shot at this, I can make my Van Damme Bloodsport movie.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder about that, too, because Van Damme actually has a story credit on this movie.
Yeah, which I guess he at least kind of helped somewhat with Bloodsport, I forget if he's credited or not, but I know he at least helped with that. But yeah, he does have a story credit, which he started doing around this point, because he also did that for like Lionheart and stuff. And he was also a fight choreographer and directed the fight scenes for this film as well.
Right, so I've always wondered if he looked at Bloodsport and said, okay, I can do better than that, and made almost a quasi-remake, but that was bigger in a lot of ways, because there's more variety of action in this one. The villain is more overtly evil, and it has like more acting opportunities for Van Damme. There's more emotion for his character.
Oh, he does the whole range of emotions in this movie. He had something to prove this time around. The people that said he was wooden in Bloodsport.
Well, you know, he is still a little wooden in this movie, though. Like, his acting abilities would have a long way to go, and some of his delivery is sort of hilarious in this. Like, do you remember what his very first line of dialogue in this movie was?
No, I don't, actually.
It's the very first scene. Kurt Sloan is watching his brother in the ring, and Van Damme just goes, "Wow." And he says it exactly like that.
He does have a lot of silly delivery in this as well. But
yeah, when he's
turning that charm up to 11.
Oh.
Like, he has the charisma down even more so than in Bloodsport.
Yeah, and
definitely.
he's baby faced in this, and he just seems almost like a naif in the woods, you know?
But he has the bod of a golden god.
Yeah.
It is ridiculous.
And that's sort of weird, because in the beginning of the movie, he's not the experienced fighter. He's had some training, but he still looks like Van Damme in 1989, so he's still, you know, this toned, hairless, oily god.
But you'll notice until he kind of, like, starts training and stuff, he's wearing very baggy clothes to kind of, like, hide the fact that he's so fucking jacked.
Well, they did not disguise that well.
Well, you notice as his training begins, his clothes get a little tighter. There's a lot more wife beaters, a lot tighter pants before he's wearing kind of baggier shirts and stuff.
Yeah, he wears progressively less clothing throughout the film.
Which I, of course, appreciate.
Yeah, because by the end, he's wearing, like, a banana hammock and a loincloth. You know?
Yeah, it is amazing. They give you everything, and it's just like he just has, like, bun flaps in the back, and those things are flapping all over the place.
Yeah, there's so much man-ass in that final fight.
There really is. And, of course, one of the tropes I count is kind of shirtlessness and nudity and stuff, but I just stopped counting in this movie. I was just like, there's just a lot of it. I'll just say that.
Well, Bangkok's hot. That, you know, it's a warm country, so...
And I guess before we get into the actual movie, of course, I usually ask people their experience of Van Damme and what they think of him, but I've, of course, already done that with you. So, since appearing on the podcast initially, has your thoughts about Van Damme changed at all? Have you explored any other aspects of his career or anything like that?
Not yet, but I intend to do so very soon. I'm doing a second Van Damme marathon for my blog in June, I think. So, and that's going to be primarily focused on his direct-to-video years. So I'll be watching... some better-known stuff like Maximum Risk and Street Fighter, but I'll mostly be watching the shit like Legionnaire and In Hell and Derailed and Until Death.
Oh, I'm so
stuff
sorry
like
for
that.
you.
Yeah. And I said, and I'm going to cap it off with the new Kickboxer movie. That'll be the last one I'll review for that.
I quite enjoyed the new Kickboxer movie. It's not quite as fun or cheesy as this one, but it's still really good, and Dave Bautista makes an awesome Tong Po.
Yeah, well, it has a pretty good cast for a low-budget film, because I know Gina Carino is in it as well.
Yeah, she doesn't have much to do in it, but yes, she is in it.
Well, I like her. You know, I feel like she's the Cynthia Rathrock of the new 20s, and we need to get her in more stuff.
Hopefully her career goes better than Cynthia Rathrock.
Well, I mean, yeah. So do we want to talk about the plot for Kickboxer as it is?
Yeah, see Bloodsport.
Yeah, well, it's a little different because
it's not a tournament this time. It's a one-on-one thing.
Right, and instead of it being his best friend / lover, it's his brother / lover that is injured by the villain.
Yeah, exactly. But again, they of course go out of their way to give him a big old case of the not gays, and he falls in love with his trainer's niece, which, again, completely superfluous to the plot.
Yeah.
He basically meets her once and pisses her off, and then in the next scene he's like, "You're so beautiful," and kisses her.
Yeah, they have a smooch in the rain, but that's like the only thing they do. So I'm not entirely convinced it's not an entirely platonic relationship.
Well, yeah, and he doesn't actually get laid in this like he does in Bloodsport. So we're not sure. We don't get that "I just got laid" bun shot, so who knows?
Yeah, I mean, their relationship is very chaste and rather innocent, and it's really the love for his brother that motivates the plot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And they are so in love, and it's adorable.
Well, I mean, that scene where they're riding down the river in Thailand and they've got their arms around each other. And he's wearing a denim vest just over his bare chest in that scene.
Yeah, it's kind of wonderful. And then it's followed up almost immediately with I'm going to go have sex with a prostitute scene.
Well, yeah,
His brother is the... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You got to get the gratuitous strip club scene in there so you can have the nudity. And
so basically this time around, instead of Van Damme being like the best fighter ever that goes to a foreign country to fight random people with different styles of fighting, this time he is the brother of the world championship kickboxer guy named Eric Sloan. Van Damme plays Kurt Sloan. He goes with him to Thailand because apparently after winning the belt, he's just like, oh, I guess I'll just fight the best from around the world. And the whole plot of this movie is set in motion by some random reporter who just says, hey, I heard kickboxing was invented in Thailand. You gonna go there? And Eric Sloan's like, oh, really? I'll show him what for.
Exactly. Yeah, the entire motivation for the plot is set up in the first 5 minutes of the movie.
So they go to Thailand, and Eric fights their reigning champion Tong Po, perhaps one of the best like martial arts movie villains of at least the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, he's way up there. He's awesome. I mean, awesome in like a rapey, brutally beating people to death way.
Yeah, exactly. He's the kind of the perfect bad guy in that sense. And I know you at least watched some of them. I'm not sure if you watched all of them, but I'm a big fan of Kickboxer as a series.
I haven't actually seen any of the Kickboxer sequels. It's the Bloodsport sequels I've seen.
Okay. So Kickboxer 1 is the only one with Van Damme. And then Kickboxers 2 through 4, Sasha Mitchell from Step by Step.
Yeah, the dude from In the Van from Step by Step.
Yeah, that played Cousin Cody. He takes over as the third and youngest Sloan brother, David Sloan, for 2 through 4. And then the 5th movie has Mark Dacascos in it, and it is almost completely unrelated, except for he was once a student of David Sloan's.
Well, you know, you got to get that those direct-to-video fight franchises going. Got to keep them going somehow.
Yeah, and the 5th one I've only actually seen once, and it wasn't very good, but I have so much love for 2 through 4 as well. Those are ones that used to come on, like, USA during the summertime when I was home from school, and I watched them over and over again. Like, this is probably the Van Damme film I've seen most, except for maybe Lionheart, so I kind of didn't even need to rewatch it for this, I just wanted to.
Any excuse is a good excuse to watch this movie, you know?
I probably toss it on about 3 times a year. Like, whenever I just feel like watching a Van Damme film, this is usually the one I go to.
Yeah, and you'll be lucky to know, or happy to know, that this is the first film of 2017 I have logged on Letterboxd, so...
Yeah, I guess this is also the first movie I've watched in 2017. Because the only other thing I watched was some episodes of Dirt Gently, which was quite good. I really enjoyed that show.
Yeah, I haven't... I keep meaning to read the books. I've got a to-read pile that stretches to the ceiling, so... I'm not even kidding.
Oh, they are both very good books, and I do enjoy them quite a bit, but you totally don't have to read those to enjoy the show. Okay. Like, you might enjoy the characters some, but it's not a direct adaptation. It's just kind of the main character is the same, and a couple of, like, similar elements are used from the books.
Okay, well, I know it's got Elijah Wood in it, and I do enjoy the kind of quirky leading man career he's built for himself.
No, and he is great in it, and also the guy they got, I think Sam Burnett or something like that they got to play Dirt Gently is also quite good.
Okay, well, anyway, that's off topic.
Anyway, yeah, so first movie of 2017, Kickboxer, you know, starting it off with a bang.
So to speak. And, and you know, this one is, I think, more intentionally funny than Bloodsport is. Like, most of the humor in this movie is on purpose.
Oh yeah, there are jokes in this movie, and I think most of the humor comes from his training with Zion, which I appreciate, because I like that kind of comedic, like, sensei trainer role. Like, he is a badass, and he will teach him things, but he's also like, well, he'll crack a joke. He'll make fun of him.
Well, the stuff like they tape the stake to his upper thigh, and they have the dog chase him around. And another thing, I'm so glad they let the dog live.
I am too, like, because I hadn't seen this in a little while, and I again, remember pretty much all of this movie. Their rain kiss is one of the only things I forgot, because it's so unnecessary to the rest of the movie. But no, when that happened, I kind of gasped a little bit, and I was like, wait, they don't kill the dog in this, do they? Did I forget they killed the dog? But no, they let it live, and if they had killed it, this probably would have knocked off a point for me.
Yeah, the dog is in the final scene of the movie, so you know he's okay.
They could have killed the brother. I don't really care about that. Like, but let the dog live, guys.
Yeah, not so much about him, no. I think the peak of the humor in this is, of course, the drunken dancing scene, which is, for lack of a better word, art.
Yeah, and just Gift City, man. Look at the internet, search Van Damme, you will find scenes from this movie.
Yeah, you know, he gets boozed up and he starts dancing with these two girls. And that, I love the dance where he's like got his arms up against his chest and he just kicks them out like, yeah, he's sashaying back and forth. It's
Yeah, he's got to clap with the motion, like he can't just dance, he's like just clapping to the beat, and then like, oh, I'm just gonna throw some splits in while I dance.
Well, of
just
course.
to show off these buns.
There are
Yeah.
slightly less splits per second in this movie than in Bloodsport, but I think their impact is greater.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are some great ones. Especially we have like the old fashioned leg stretching scenes where they stretch out his legs so he can do the splits easier, which again is just kind of hard to watch. And I always think of Braveheart when I see those kinds of scenes.
And they're dropping coconuts on his chest. That's another part of the training. And I love his delivery of the line, "I'm okay."
Yeah, because he tosses so many like okay hand signs up in this movie. I'm surprised it didn't end on a freeze frame of one.
Oh my god, that would have bumped the movie up a whole star for me.
Well, then watch Double Impact, because that's how that one ends.
Oh yeah, believe me, I've seen Double Impact.
Okay.
That's one of my faves.
So, of course, like I said, this is a canon picture, which gives it a few extra points in my book. I love seeing that logo at the beginning, and I know I'm in for a treat like 80 to 90% of the time with a canon film.
Yeah, and, something about the score in this movie that it's really cheesy synth with a lot of, like, vaguely Asian flute music in it. And I can't quite pinpoint why, but anytime I hear that kind of music, it just makes me super nostalgic, because it makes me think of, like, the cheesy action movies and, like, low-budget anime I watched in the early 90s as a kid for some reason. And so watching that just amused me, just hearing that I can't even really describe it, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, that vaguely Asiatic flute music they always play to establish the fact that we're in Asia.
And you see it all the time, so yeah, it does kind of bring that same feeling back in me as well. And then to top that, you do have those 3 amazing Stan Bush songs in here that just, again, the scene or two, I think they had 2 songs in Bloodsport, but there are 3 in this one, and it just blows it out of the water.
Yeah, I mean, there's Fight for Love, that's the Van Damme is Sad montage song.
Yeah, that's the one where he's thinking about how much he loves his brother.
Right, he's walking around Bangkok just being sad. And
it's the equivalent of the scene where he rides around on the train in Bloodsport.
yeah, it's the exact same scene. And then, of course, the ballad, the amazing closing song is Never Surrender.
Never Surrender, that's what's going to be at the end of this episode,
course.
Definitely.
Never Surrender,
and then we have the
Never Say
song
Die.
In the beginning.
He's got the heart of a hero.
He does. And then we have the first song, the one that starts the movie, which is Streets of Siam.
Oh, of course.
Which is kind of another one. It's the one that you maybe would remember the least, but it's also a really good song.
Well,
I actually had a hard time deciding which one to close the episode on, because I really could have done any of those 3.
Yeah, that's the one that plays when they're riding around on the boat looking at the little boys naked swimming in the river.
Yes, exactly. And it's that same thing of just like, oh, it's, this far-off culture, it's the other, we don't know what to expect, they're all crazy and violent out here, they don't fight traditionally, they don't fight with rules like we do in America.
Yeah, because, Tong Po beats the shit out of Eric, severs his spine with his elbow, and then they just dump his body outside of the area where they're fighting.
Which I kind of love, because that just seems awesome. It's like, okay, we're done with you.
Yeah, they have no room for weakness in Taiwan. How's the song go? Bangkok, Oriental City, one night in Bangkok makes a hard man humble.
Yes, and it did. It did that for Eric Sloan.
Yeah, because then Van Damme has to team up with this random cab driver dude, he's never met before.
He's like an expat. He was like ex-special forces that just decided to stay in Bangkok.
Right, yeah, he's a Vietnam vet, and of course he says this immediately after meeting Kurt so that the audience can understand this character's backstory. And even though they've known each other for all of 5 seconds, he stays in the waiting room with him in the hospital while his brother's in surgery. Very similar to the black guy he meets in Lionheart.
Yeah, very much so. Just it kind of, I think the guy in Lionheart is a mix of Zion and this guy. It's kind of a mix of the two, because he's kind of his mentor as well as being his sidekick.
Yeah. And I don't know, and the weird thing about that character is it introduces this other element of action into the movie, because mostly the action in this film is one-on-one fighting in the ring, as you'd expect.
It's a martial arts picture, yeah.
Yeah, but then in the last act, they introduce this sequence where Xian and I think Kurt is the name of the cab driver. No, Kirk's the brother. I've got it written down here somewhere.
Taylor.
Taylor.
It's Winston Taylor.
Winston Taylor is the cab driver. Anyway, Xian and Taylor go to the bad guy's base operation with like a grenade launcher, and they're shooting people and kicking meat hooks into people just to introduce this other element of action into the movie.
Which, again, the only scene in the movie that has any kind of gunplay or anything like that is that one warehouse scene.
Yeah, it really comes out of nowhere, but I kind of love it because it's just like, this is an 80s action movie trying to give you more boom for your buck.
Yeah, and they kind of continue that a little bit in the Kickboxer sequels, because in the third one, Zion actually does... Actually, he's in the second and the third one. But in the third one, they're both somewhere else. I think they're somewhere else in Europe. And it basically just ends up being David Sloan and Zion, like, going through a house with guns, shooting people, and there's very little martial arts in it.
Yeah, you know, I'm part of this website called alloutofbubblegum.com that tracks, like, action hero kill counts in movies. And, of course, somebody on the forum is tracking Sasha Mitchell. And I know one of the Kickboxer sequels has a way higher body count than any of the other ones. So I'm guessing...
That would be 3.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's that one.
It's called The Art of War.
The Art of War. I love that they could get the guy who played Zian back, but not Van Damme. Like, that was the budgets those sequels were working for.
He came back for 2 sequels. And actually, also, Michael Cassie, who played Tong Po in this one, also came back for 2. And then in 4, they bring back the character of Tom Poe, but he's played by Kamal Kharifa, who was in some other Van Damme movies as well, and was like another old friend of Van Damme's, but he plays Tong Po in the 4th one.
Now, that's interesting you bring up the actor playing Tong Po, because I don't know if you noticed, in the credits, Tong Po is credited as himself.
Yeah, I have no idea why they did that, but yeah, it's Michael Cassie, and he was also in Bloodsport. He was the fighter that Chong Li broke the leg of.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, he's like Chong Li in Bloodsport, but more evil. You know, he's not just a massive, mean-spirited fighter. He's also like a mob enforcer. And of course, most infamously, he rapes Kurt's girlfriend. And again, you know, that female character is totally superfluous to the plot. This assault happens to her just to motivate Van Damme, just to give him the power-up he needs to beat the bad guy at the end of the movie.
Yeah, which is the one, because I pretty much watched this movie again going in thinking like, well, this is a straight up 10 out of 10. Like, this is just as good as Bloodsport. But then that happened, and I guess maybe I hadn't thought about it in a while, but for some reason it hit me a lot differently this time, and I was like, well, that's just unnecessary. But this happens a lot in movies, especially 80s action movies. Like, if there is a woman love interest, like, chances are she's going to get raped by the bad guy.
There's about a 56% chance she's going to get raped or murdered.
Exactly, in order to fuel the vengeance of our hero so that he can come out triumphant in the end. But of course, no attention is paid to like how she is traumatized from this.
Yeah, nobody gives a shit about her. And that's just unfortunately, you know, the way the political climate has changed from 1989 to today. We're a little more sensitive to these issues than we were then. Thank
Christ.
Well, I mean, yeah, for the better, no doubt. And unfortunately, that scene is the moment where Tong Po says to Kurt, "Mei Ling, good fuck." You know, it's just hilarious, unfortunately.
It is, yeah. And again, because she also, like, she doesn't tell Kurt about it after it happens. She tells Zion about it. But she does use it one more time, because when he's trying to get Taylor to help him get his brother after Eric gets kidnapped by Freddie Lee and Tong Po, he's not going to help him. But then she goes up to his truck and she's like, "Tong Po raped me. So see, you have to help."
I know, and at the end, she, you know, Van Damme has that delivery of that line, "Tell me."
Yeah, tell me the truth.
Yeah, and another thing I love about this movie is this weird, totally random element where earlier he's training in like some ancient Taiwanese cities, like the Stone City they call it, and he's like getting flashbacks to ancient Taiwanese warriors fighting with staffs, and there's a shot of a falcon, and later when he's...
and an owl,
yeah,
and a bird. There are so many bird metaphors in this.
And later when he's fighting Tong Po, when he gets the power-up that allows him to defeat him, he like has these flashes of ancient warriors fighting, and you know, the falcon screaming. He gets the talon of the falcon, and this enables him to defeat his enemy.
You know, fine. I'll take that. This is an 80s action movie and a martial arts picture. I get it. That's fine.
Just that random element of mysticism that I find deliciously, deliriously amusing.
It's like completely wrong-headed in every way, but really entertaining, given that I guess we've moved so far beyond that now to where that's not usually the case anymore in movies.
Yeah, because there's this implication in this movie and a lot of movies like it where the white guy goes to an Asian country and does kung fu better than the actual Asian people can.
He just has to find that mysterious trainer that everyone writes off.
Right,
And then he trains and he learns in the old ways even better than everyone else.
I guess we're still doing it because Doctor Strange just came out this year, and that's the exact same plot of that movie. So, just magic instead of kung fu.
I actually didn't see that, but yeah, that makes sense.
And we got to talk about.
I guess we did the same thing with like Batman Begins as well.
Yeah, a little bit.
So I guess we're still doing that. So never mind.
And we got to talk about Eric Sloane as a character who is a really ridiculous character because he's he's a douchebag because he has the pencil mustache
and a mullet to go on top of that.
Yeah, and and speaking of like the weird gay subtext that's in all of Van Damme's early movies, where like his brother picks up one of the strippers at the bar, or I don't know, she's a hooker or something, and they go into a hotel room together, and Van Damme just is left standing outside smiling, but he doesn't seem to like completely understand the transactions that is happening here, which just builds.
He's just like, watch your wallet.
Yeah, like which to me it further enforces how this character strikes me as weirdly innocent,
It is, and yeah, because again, he's probably supposed to be like in his early to mid 20s or something like that in this. But yeah, he is a very oddly innocent character, and that I guess maybe that's part of the reason why he doesn't have like a sex scene with Zion's niece. Maybe that, and also the fact that her character gets raped in this movie, so you maybe don't want that dichotomy in your film.
Yeah, well,
but
but even after Eric Sloane is paralyzed, one of the hilarious things about this movie is even when in a wheelchair, he can still like kick people's ass.
yeah, it does. Of course, he still has his upper body strength, and he's punching and throwing people. But there's a scene in the warehouse where he's totally like moving his legs around in a way that he would not be able to do.
Oh, and it's amazing where like somebody walks up behind him and he just sucker punches them. Like, oh man, you never expected the dude in the wheelchair, did you?
Yeah, I guess not, even though he was the world heavyweight kickboxing champion. So also, let's talk a little bit about this, because this guy is not a good actor. He was actually just a fighter that they hired to be in this movie, so he's an actual fighter. Okay. Even though he kind of doesn't look it, he more fights as if he were an actor pretending to be a fighter, as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, Dennis Alexio is Eric Sloane. Does he have any other credits of note?
I think he has like 3 total IMDb credits. And I think he is in like one other cheesy action movie and like one guest spot on a TV show.
Yeah, you're exactly right. He is in a movie called Picasso Trigger, and he did an episode of a series called Super Force.
Oh man, Picasso Trigger, that's going on my list.
It's apparently an Andy Sedaris film, so...
Fun. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Van Damme's nationality in this movie.
No
because,
explanation.
Of course, his brother Eric is... Well, there's a little bit of one. It's vague. So Eric Sloane, they're like live in LA together, but he's just American. He's straight up American, looks kind of like he has an Italian heritage, and Van Damme is Van Damme. But they basically explain it by saying that their parents split up when they were very young, and Eric went to live with their father in America or Los Angeles or something, and then I guess he moved in with his mother and lived in Europe.
Oh.
Or something like that. Because he said some point that he was born originally in Belgium, but he lives in LA now. But he also said something about, I think, living in France with his mom, and she taught him like 3 different languages, and he had to study ballet and all this other stuff.
Okay, I remember him saying he studied ballet. That totally exposition scene where they're sparring, and for some reason they just start talking about their parents, right? I guess I missed the line where he said he grew up in France or whatever.
I might be inserting that in there. I think that's what he said, but he definitely said that he grew up with his mom and she made sure he learned a bunch of different languages and stuff. But he does just throw out the fact that he was born in Belgium, which doesn't explain anything about where Eric was born.
Yeah, well, you just go with it. Like, I mean, that's really, when I was watching all those Van Damme movies last year, that really became one of my favorite tropes, where they'll just drop a line in the beginning of the movie that says, oh yeah, he's Canadian or he's Cajun or something, and you just go with it. Like, okay, that's why he has this ridiculous accent when nobody else does.
Yeah, exactly. And a line is usually good enough. I also kind of enjoy when they just don't address it at all.
Yeah, that's great too.
They don't do it as much. That's more something they do with like Schwarzenegger vehicles. But I always enjoy just like making no mention of it and acting like it's this weird alternate world where people just have accents randomly and there's no addressing them.
Well, like in Cyborg, where even in the apocalypse, apparently Van Damme is a French, immigrant.
Yeah, named Gibson Rickenbacker.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other movie there, but. Yeah, this is a really, really just entertaining movie all the way through. For me, I don't like it quite as much as Bloodsport because it has a slightly slower start. But once you get to that drunken dance scene in the bar, from there on in, it's just amazement up until the conclusion.
Yeah, and it's action-packed, and of course you do have an awesome training montage set to a Stan Bush song.
Gotta have the training montage.
Yeah, exactly, and it works really well.
And
this was also a huge hit for Van Damme as well, because this somewhere between like $1.5 million and $2.5 million budget, and grossed like $15 million at the box office.
Oh, wow.
So I think this did even better than Bloodsport. I think Bloodsport only pulled like 10 to 12 million at the box office.
Well, I guess because not as many people saw that first movie, they weren't upset when they saw this movie, which is almost the exact same plot.
You get both the crowd. You get the new guys and the Bloodsport fans that just want another Bloodsport.
Yeah, and this is one of those 80s action movies that have no resolution at the end. It ends directly after he beats the bad guy, and I actually kind of love it when they do that. It's just elegant. You know, like, we have no other plot to resolve. Kurt has beat the shit. He's humble, as the Iron Sheik would say. He has made Tong Po humble. And, you know, and then it's basically the theme song starts playing and it's credits.
Yeah, but it's always weird because they do it like this to where, like, it's the end scene, and they'll freeze frame it eventually, but they usually let it play out about 30 seconds longer than it really should before that freeze frame, so the camera's kind of slowly panning back, and then he's just, like, shaking everyone's hands around him and, like, hugging people, but it just kind of seems like they're running out of steam doing that.
You know, it's just the weird visual language and pacing of movies from the 80s and early 90s. It's hard to explain to somebody any younger than we are who didn't experience this. But, like, I think television would do that a lot, where, like, the episode would end and they would have the freeze frame usually on people laughing or giving a thumbs up or something like that, hugging, you know.
Yeah, just as cheesy as possible. It'd be like, okay, we basically resolved the main plot of our story. This ends, so yeah, just freeze frame it. We'll get out of here. We'll save a little bit of money by keeping this about, 90 to 100 minutes.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's totally dated now. They don't do it anymore. But whenever you see that in a movie, it just strikes you as charming. And maybe because I have that nostalgic connection to that kind of visual language to it. I keep waiting for somebody to do, and if somebody else doesn't do it, I guess it's on me to do this. I want to, like, see a Black Dynamite style parody of canon movies from the 80s, because they have all these weird visual quirks that I think you could incorporate into a comedy, and absolutely nobody would get the joke except for people who are familiar with canon films, which is probably why nobody's made that movie.
Yeah, and you would just have to walk a very fine line, because I really enjoy Black Dynamite. That's done very well.
Yeah, I love
but
that movie.
But it just happened to work just right, doing it kind of campy and winking. Like, I think doing something like that, you would have to almost play it more straight. If you try to be funny with it, if you try to be like, ha ha ha, we know what we're doing, we're in on the joke, it's so easy to make a bad movie out of that.
Yeah, and that's why there are so few good spoofs. I think we're off topic now, but if you go back and watch, like, Airport, the movie is like 90% straight, and it's just the characters and situations that are ridiculous, but everybody's treating it seriously.
Oh, you mean Airplane?
Oh,
this is
shit.
based on the Airport.
Yeah, I said Airport, didn't I? Well, you know what I meant.
Well, again, that's the thing that works for it, because it basically is just the exact same thing as one of those movies. They just kind of flip it on its head with the characters and put in some silly situations and stuff.
And it's hilarious. I love that movie. So.
And that's what I think Black Dynamite worked really well, too, because it was more or less played straight. They kind of had some fun with, like, the visual style of it and just kind of the grainy, the weird edits, the boom mics and stuff like that. But it's so easy to get too tongue-in-cheek with it, like too knowingly winking at the audience. And I've seen a lot more of that recently, and it just gets on my nerves.
Yeah.
Like, there was I forget what he was even called. It was, like, Kung Fury or something like that. That short film that came out last year, I think.
Yeah, I did see Kung Fury, yeah.
I despised that, and everyone seemed to love it. Like, I was with it for all of about 2 to 5 minutes, and then I just lost interest and was completely hated it.
There were one or two funny gags in that, but, if it had been any longer than it was, it would have been completely insufferable. And obviously, I
will say the one good thing that came from it is the idea of casting Jorma Taccone as Hitler, I think, was brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, that was one that definitely tried too hard, but I did like the joke where he kills the guys with the tank and then says, "Tank you." That was the one funny joke in that. Anyway, Kickboxer.
Yeah, Kickboxer, sorry.
It's a movie about people who both kick and box.
It is, and I guess that also just goes back to the fascination we had with kickboxing in the late 80s to early 90s, because this is one of several dozen kickboxer franchises from this time period.
Well, that's because it seemed a little seedy and secluded and kind of this dark secret thing that I don't think a lot of people actually knew very much about. So it was a good basis because, in addition to Bloodsport and Kickboxer, there were movies like American Kickboxer, which had a couple of sequels, I think. And
American Ninja as well.
Yeah, American Ninja kind of falls into that as well, which also had...
Best of the Best. It's so many.
Yeah, Best of the Best. That had, Eric Roberts in it, right?
Eric Roberts, yeah. Best of the Best. There was Blood Fist with Don the Dragon Wilson.
Which we've already discussed.
5 sequels.
Yeah. There was just this idea that, in the late 80s, early 90s, if you could get a martial artist who could kick high and had a silly name, you could probably make a movie that would get at least one or two sequels.
Exactly, and mostly just because you have the martial artists there so they can help choreograph the fights and they can actually make them look good, make them look like real fights, and it's easy to make movies like this for cheap, like $1 to $3 million, and then you toss them out of the box office. Kickboxing and karate and stuff was all the rage in the late 80s, early 90s, so you're guaranteed to make at least 5 times your money back.
Yeah, and we've completely lost that. Like, you still have the low-budget direct-to-video action movies, usually starring Steven Seagal if he can be bothered to get out off of his couch that week.
Yeah, he's still down in that hole. He just came out with another one like a week or two ago.
Well, I know there was that amazing AV Club review of one of his newer movies that went kind of viral because it was just hilarious reading about it. I don't even remember what the movie was called. They all have generic titles.
Well, I mean, he's still swinging that paunch around, trying to make it work.
Yeah, a Van Damme podcast is a fun idea because so many of his films are really entertaining. A similar project about Seagal would just be a punishing, disturbing, depressing journey.
Well, that's the one where, I feel like I could only get 5 or 6 episodes out. We'd do his good movies, and then I'd be like, I think I'm going to call it quits now, guys. I don't really want to get into the 2000s period with Seagal.
Yeah, exactly. He had 6, maybe 12 if you're being generous, films that weren't complete shit, and then after that, just forget about it, man.
So Van Damme works because even when he was in direct-to-DVD purgatory, he did make some shit movies, but he also made a lot of really weird and interesting ones that are still worth a watch and worth talking about.
And that's the thing with Van Damme. He has this weird European quality that distinguishes him from somebody like Seagal, who's sort of one note. Because even in this movie, that very early in his career, we talked about it a little bit, he's trying to emote and he cries in several scenes. He's trying to show that he can do more than just beat the shit out of people, even though he's really, really good at that.
Well, this thing, he's not trying to be an action star, he's trying to be a movie star.
Yeah. And it would take him, about 2 decades before he really earned any respect for his acting ability.
Yeah, but that's the thing, too, is that most of these guys, like your Eric Roberts or Don the Dragon Wilsons, they got stuck in these kind of movies, these martial arts movies, and they just kept making them, and that's kind of all they did. Maybe there'd be a sci-fi element every once in a while, but Van Damme pretty much did, this, Bloodsport, and Lionheart, and then kind of got out of that racket for a while, and then he started doing Street Fighter and Time Cop and other weird action comedy movies and stuff. He got away from the traditional martial arts movies pretty quickly in his career.
Which, I don't know if that was a conscious decision on his half, because he knew that was a genre with a limited appeal that was already, the value of that was already being diluted by 10,000 low-budget knockoffs, or if he just wanted to try different things, I don't know.
I think it's more just whatever came to him, but I want to feel like he at least made somewhat of a decision, okay, I want to be, because he always just wanted to be a movie star, not necessarily a martial arts action star. So I think he made a conscious decision to try to just get the biggest projects possible, the biggest, most different project he could get to catapult him to stardom. Yeah,
because even Cyborg, which he did around the same time as this, is different from these movies.
Oh yeah, Cyborg came out the same year, actually. I think it filmed after this, probably, but it did also come out at, the end of '89.
Yeah, and even though that film has a lot of the tropes, like the shirtless fight with the rival at the end, it's still, this post-apocalyptic sci-fi movie, so it's very different from what he was doing in Kickboxer and Bloodsport. So, I'm looking for my notes here, seeing if I have anything else I need to talk about.
I always loved Tong Po's little hat that he wears.
Yeah,
that looks
is
like a
that?
tennis racket.
I
suppose it's some traditional, Thai headwear or something, maybe something religious or something, but it just always, I don't know, it really interested me. It's like a little tennis racket with a kind of curved top.
Yeah, and I wonder if it is a religious thing, because the scene before that, he's bowing and praying in the ring. so I don't know. But something I do want to bring up is there is a video on YouTube, and this hasn't gone viral yet, so hopefully I can make the discovery on this. It is a techno remix of the scene in this movie where Tong Po is kicking the pillar, and then it segues into the moment after Van Damme beats up this unimportant character in the ring and then yells at the gangsters, give me Tong Po, I want Tong Po, and somebody has done a techno remix of that, and it's pretty amazing.
Oh, you should send me a link to that, and I will put it in the episode description, because I really want to watch that.
Yeah, I definitely will. That whole channel has... this is totally off topic, but that channel also has this amazing video, and I don't know if you're familiar with the scene from Friday the 13th Part 5, where Miguel Nunez Jr. is in the outhouse, but he did a techno remix of that moment as well.
Part 5? New Beginning or New Blood?
Yeah, New Beginning is Part 5. That's the one that doesn't actually have Jason in it.
Oh, yeah, and the other creep is the killer instead.
Yeah, the lookalike.
The ambulance driver. Yeah.
Anywho, that's off topic. But I need to look up the name of that channel, so I'll definitely send you that video. Anywho,
do that.
Kickboxer, for me, it ranks pretty high in the Van Damme pantheon, and depending on my mood, I may actually prefer it to Bloodsport, but those two are neck and neck.
They are. Well, Bloodsport is... I mean, it's still kind of cheesy and campy, but it's a bit more serious. It seems a bit more high class, and Kickboxer is kind of a bit more low class campy. But they're both still just kind of wonderful movies, and I think even though Chong Li is a great villain for Bloodsport, I think Tong Po is just a much more memorable villain, and it's kind of like how you have in a lot of movies, like your movie is only as good as your villain half the time when it's like an action movie like this, and Tong Po is such a great villain, like you kind of mentioned when we first see him, he is kicking a pillar and punching it, and just like plaster is just falling out of it, and you are immediately like afraid of this guy, that he is a threat.
Yeah, and he has a little more personality than the bad guy in Bloodsport, who was mostly just staring with crazy eyes. Tong Po does a little more stuff.
Yeah, he definitely does, including rape.
Okay, well, yeah, that's fair.
Which actually doesn't stop there, because when he comes back for Part 4, the whole plot of that, it goes back to more of a Bloodsporty, like, tournament-style fighting with a bunch of different fighters, because there's this tournament that Tong Po holds at his compound every year for the best fighters around the world, and David Sloan gets released from jail and sneaks into it to try to get his wife back, who Tong Po kidnapped. He basically set David up for murder, made him go to jail, kidnapped his wife, and then raped her repeatedly.
I had no idea the lore for the Kickboxer franchise was so complex.
I will write you a thesis paper. I could easily do about 20 pages on Kickboxer franchise.
Oh, wow. Yeah. But, and you mentioned this movie seems a little cheesier than Bloodsport, and it's weird because the story is actually a little darker because you have this international crime element and, the rape scene we've referenced repeatedly, and more violence and murder in it. And yet there's more humor in this movie than there was in Bloodsport.
Again, yeah, you're right, because even in Bloodsport, his buddy, he gets beat up and he gets put in the hospital, but he's fine. He's kicking again by the end of the movie. It's not like his brother that gets paralyzed. It's not like a dog that almost gets killed and, a woman that gets beaten and raped and all of this stuff. But at the same time, you have the scene where Van Damme gets drunk and dances to a cheesy song before having a drunk fight, so...
Yeah, there's this weird kind of parallel there because, like I said, it seems the plot-wise it is a little more darker, but there's way more humor in this one, which just makes it a more entertaining film for the audience.
That's true, because Bloodsport is great, but it is a straightforward action movie, and it does, for the most part, even though it is cheesy mostly just from being dated as an 80s movie, this is legitimately kind of campy and funny, so it maybe might not be as prestigious as Bloodsport, which sounds ridiculous to say, but, I mean, again, it's more overall entertaining, I think.
Yeah, and, watching these movies as kids, I actually didn't see this one as a young kid, but you don't really pick up on those weird tonal shifts as a kid. You just think, oh, okay, well, in this scene he's punching somebody, and in this scene there's a grenade launcher for some reason, and people are being eviscerated with meat hooks.
And again, this is the kind of movies we watched a lot as kids, so I feel like, oh yeah, that's just what happens in these movies, right? This is an action movie.
Yeah, you just accept it at face value. You don't even think it's weird, but you pick up on it going back as an adult. But yeah, if I was to give this the Van Damme rating, is it time for that?
Not quite. I do want to bring up one more thing before we get to that, because it's one thing that also brought it down a little bit for me this time around. And I guess maybe I've seen it so many times, I still love it. But again, the rape scene just seems really unnecessary this time. And maybe I'm just getting to the point where those scenes start to really bother me. Maybe I've seen it so much to where, like, they leave a bad taste in my mouth now. But in addition to that, you have such a great villain, Tong Po, and we get that awesome introduction to him. He breaks Eric's spine in that first fight. And then in the last fight with Sloane, yes, he's been training and he's good and everything, but it's basically like they threaten him and say, we have your brother, you have to lose this fight. So he gets the shit beat out of him by Tong Po for the first couple of rounds, and then as soon as his brother comes back, he just beats the shit out of Tong Po and gets no, like, fight from him anymore. Like, you had such a formidable villain, he still should have been harder to beat, I feel like.
Yeah, though I do have to say that the first part of that fight where Van Damme is just getting the shit kicked out of him is surprisingly bracing. Like, you can really feel the pain.
Well, yeah, because they're fighting with the broken glass and stuff, so
Right.
they do all those slices to his legs and his gut and stuff, which is great, but it should have been like maybe he wasn't giving it his all or something, but it still seems like once he knew his brother was okay and the fight starts, maybe you're just trying to keep the movie at a lower runtime now, but I feel like he still should have had a little bit more fight from Tong Po. It shouldn't have been so easy for him to get the up on him immediately.
Yeah, and, you mentioned the runtime, and this one is 93 minutes long, which is about 5 minutes longer than these movies usually are.
That's true.
Which is an interesting choice. Usually these low-budget action movies have you in and out in 89 minutes, so...
Yeah, and that's including credits.
Yeah.
This is more like, 93, 97 minutes with credits?
Yeah, and so it's interesting. I guess they really wanted to make more room for, the kissing in the rain and the dancing, and the the brother in the wheelchair beating people up.
Yeah, and all of that's fine, and I do feel like, again, the love plot is completely unnecessary, but I feel like the only reason they have those two, like, scenes of them kissing is to give the rape scene some weight, to make it seem like, oh, why does he even care that much? Oh, but they kissed in the rain that one time.
Yeah, well, like I said, they got to give him the power up at the end. He's got to tap into his inner warrior so he can defeat his opponent, tapping into his falcon animal totem there for some reason or whatever.
Again, I still love it. It's still great, but I guess maybe seeing some... But then again, when I think about Kickboxer franchise as a whole, Tong Po is kind of like a shitty villain, it turns out, or at least a shitty fighter, because he gets beat 2 other times in the series pretty easily by a Sloane.
Well, and that's sort of a weird trope in the action movies, too, where you build up the villain as this unstoppable badass, but because the hero has to win, the bad guy still ends up going down like a bitch at the end of the movie.
Yeah, and again, it just seems like, of course, we do get scenes of Tong Po beating the shit out of Sloane before he comes back, and that's great, so it makes the fight very satisfying still when Van Damme does. And I get it at this point, this is more like Van Damme's hero moment, you're showing off his moves, you're showing him being heroic, slow motion, spin kicks, all that kind of shit, and it's great, but I feel like, again, Tong Po is such a good villain, it seems like as soon as he gets kicked in the face once by Van Damme, he's just like being Jello around the ring, just like falling down all over the place.
Well, you could make the case that, the gangsters tell Sloane to throw the fight at the beginning, and maybe Tong Po wasn't expecting any fight at all from his opponent, so it just surprised him when he got beat.
He was just drinking gin and eating cheeseburgers and fucking women all night.
Yeah, maybe it's like
came
a
in
tortoise in the
half-assing
hare
it.
scenario, he was so certain of his victory that he didn't expect any resistance at all.
So yeah, that's going to give me a little bit of chew on for a second. So why don't we go to Van Damage ratings? What is your rating for Kickboxer?
I mean, it's got to be a 9 out of 10,
Very good. I completely agree with that. Like I said, I went in thinking it was going to be a 10, but I'll give it a solid 9. It's still, I'll put Bloodsport a little bit above it, even though I prefer this to Bloodsport kind of, but as an overall movie and as, the troubling things about it, I'll probably give it a 9, but I do think it's a better vehicle for Van Damme than Bloodsport is. Like, Bloodsport kind of put him on the map, but as far as a Van Damme movie goes, I think Kickboxer has it a little bit better.
Yeah, well, Bloodsport was his first serious leading role, so, the troops we associate with him were only beginning to be built up. So this is maybe, you could say, the first movie of his that is truly a Van Damme film, because he really begins to develop the things we associate with him in this movie.
That is true. So Bloodsport kind of invented it, kind of molded it a little bit, and then Kickboxer kind of set it in stone.
Yeah, and notably, on my checklist, this has all 5 of the troops I look for in these movies. The entire fight scene without a shirt, the dancing, kicking somebody through something, close-up screaming. I think there's one other, but I can't remember now what it is.
Yeah, no, he kicks several people through several things in this movie, and it is always very fulfilling.
Oh, and then the splits and the roundhouse kicks, of course. It's got everything. It's got all the things you associate with him as a performer.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And like I said, I kind of took what you had and stretched out those tropes a little bit further, but I think I wrote down like 8 different tropes for this movie, and it hit every one multiple times.
Yeah, so, this is, even though, I don't know if I like Bloodsport more. It just depends on my mood which one of these I will go to, because, as I have pointed out repeatedly, they're very, very similar.
They are. It's really just a matter of taste. And again, like, Bloodsport is great, and I would maybe even consider it, like, a better overall movie, like, if I'm just thinking of, like, good movies. But at the same time, if I'm, half drunk at 2 o'clock in the morning and feel like watching a Van Damme movie, Kickboxer is going in there. Unless I feel like crying, then Lionheart's going in there.
That is maybe the ideal way to watch this movie. Drunk at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, 3 or 4 beers in, getting towards midnight, feel like watching a movie before you pass out. Put in Kickboxer. You will have a Van Damme good time.
And you will have dreams of glistening oil-covered abs.
That's what we call a Tuesday, my friend.
All right.
So Zach, plug your stuff. Tell everybody where they can find you yet again.
Yeah, well, if you didn't check it out the first time I was on the show, you can find me at www.blogspot.com www.zacksfilmthoughts.blogspot.com. That's Zach with a K. And then on that same place, you can find my podcast, The Bangers and Mash Show, which Mr. Marcus Jones was on rather recently.
I totally was, and they're also all on your YouTube channel as well, which is where I usually listen to them.
Yeah, and we recently just hit 100 episodes of the Bangers and Mash Show, which I hope the JPVD hits someday.
I hope I can stretch it that far. Van Damme needs to hurry it up with these movies and start coming out with a few more.
Well, and did you hear about his next film, Kill 'Em All? This actually sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, no, I am very excited about that, and also his son is going to be in that with him as well.
Yeah, and Peter Stormare is the bad guy.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited. Anything where he's the bad guy works, but I just hope, he puts out enough movies to where this can keep going, and I don't have to resort to, doing individual episodes on episodes of, Behind Closed Doors or something like that.
Yeah, you're going to have to cover the 2 episodes he did of Las Vegas, right?
Yep, eventually that'll probably happen unless he starts getting out these new Kickboxer sequels a little bit faster.
Yeah, and they've already got the sequel to the remake, in the can, which blows my mind.
Yeah, no, I am excited about that too. I really enjoyed that movie. I'm down for more. We'll see how that goes. But no, he's doing good, and eventually I'll have to watch those Kung Fu Panda movies, so I'm looking forward to that.
All right, well, until next time, I guess we'll just have to say that never surrender, never say die.
Yeah, the episode before this was No Retreat, No Surrender, so I keep wanting to get that confused. But yeah, no, thank you very much for joining me again, Zach. After you do your next Van Damme report card, if there's any of those direct-to-DVD movies that you're just aching to talk about, you can come back for that.
Man, anytime you need somebody to talk Van Damme, I think I will be available.
Cool. Well, I'm sure I will get people to start losing interest pretty soon, and I'll just have you back every week. You'll become a co-host eventually. But yeah, thank you very much, and we'll see you here next time on Jean-Claude Van Damme.
You were born a fighter.